Finally, after years and years in the making, Aliko Dangote's refinery is open and in business. Today, I'm going to talk with an Arise News host, Arise News reporter, and we're going to talk about the refinery, some of the implications that it has for you as an entrepreneur. What are opportunities that you can find to make more money in light of having this refinery? What are some business opportunities that it's going to create? What are some jobs that it's going to create? We're going to talk about all of that, as well as the implications of Nigeria refining its own oil. Let's get into the video. Welcome to Business in Nigeria, the podcast that equips you with the knowledge and tools you need to start and grow your business in Nigeria. If you are an entrepreneur, aspiring entrepreneur, or simply curious about the Nigerian business landscape, this podcast is for you. Our aim is to provide you with the inside scoop, the ins and outs, the key details, and the nitty-gritty of doing business in Nigeria. Join us as we explore the challenges, opportunities, and best practices for navigating the Nigerian business landscape. I'm your host, Kenemo, and let's get into the video. Abby Owolowi, nice to have you.
Thank you, Kerim. It's nice to be here.
So talk to me about Dangote Refinery. You were there yesterday. Talk to me about what's going on for those people that aren't caught up.
Right. Well, I mean, a good place to begin would be, of course, yesterday was a very auspicious occasion for the Dangote Group. This is a project that has been going on for quite a bit, with quite a few hiccups as well. Production, well, not even production. Starting the entire project has taken quite a few years, and it's been highly anticipated to be one of the biggest private investments on the continent. $19 billion is the cost of putting this together. What is the entire refinery idea about? Of course, we do know that Nigeria expends a lot of capital injection on importing refined products, in spite of being a major oil producer. So a lot of our revenue is spent on that, as opposed to using all the crude that you have and refining those products in-house, and then, of course, boosting your internal revenues. But of course, we expend that money, the logistics of taking it all out, bringing it back in. The refinery's primary objective is to completely cut out that process and begin to look at the process of self-sufficiency and eliminating import dependency. And of course, all of that was a combination now.
So the CBN, governor had said that it would save us about $30 billion a year, from our petroleum, our refined oil, I guess, imports. Yes. Some people are saying, tens of billions of dollars. Talk to me about how that's going to affect Nigerians' everyday life. How's that going to translate to the everyday person's life?
Right, that's a very important
because the price of oil is still going to be it's universal, but it's those import fees, So yeah, talk to me about that.
Yeah, I think that's a very important question, and that's a major concern for the everyday user, which say, look, okay, that's all fantastic, but how does that affect my pocket? Am I going to be spending more? Am I going to be spending less on my petrol? But correct, realistic answer to that would be it's going to be only a marginal difference, if at all there is. The reason being that the importation cost that you save in pretty much is not going to make a substantial mark. If anything at all, these reserves are going to go into other sectors: infrastructure, education, healthcare. But the good news would be there will be fewer queues and there will be a constant availability of products. That would be the major difference.
Well, that's big. That's big because of the fuel scarcity that we've seen even over the past year. So that's a big difference. So even though the cost itself that you're paying at the pump is not going to be that much higher, but the difference will be felt across the country, is what you're saying. It's going to be spread across in different sectors in the country, is what you're saying.
Absolutely. Well, that's the hope.
So what hope? Right. What hope can Nigerians have for sort of what hope can Nigerians have that, this extra money that we are going to have in the country circulating is really going to go into these other sectors? And what difference will that really make for them?
Yes, that's a very important point because really it sounds all fancy and it sounds very exciting. Yes, we're going to move this money into other sectors, but for that to actually really be a successful process, there's got to be some checks in that process. Who is making sure this money is actually going there? Is there in fact, accountability for that? Because yes, it's one thing to boost the country's reserves in terms of your spendings, but we've also seen cases. A very good example would be last year alone, Nigeria spent $23 billion on importation of products. That money, if there were ways in which it could have been well allocated, there would have been ways in which this money could have also gone to other places. But there is no structure holding. I'm referring in many ways to accountability. And if we begin to see that alongside the shift, which is going to be, yes, seismic on the macro level, but not necessarily for the pockets of the average man. However, if the average man says, hey, I'm going to have better healthcare infrastructure, I'm going to have better access to education, then I begin to feel more of the excitement of how it affects the guy on the street. So until we have those structures, until we have a body that is, trying to find where the flows are going, we might as well just be throwing darts in the air.
Right. Okay, so talk to me about yesterday. So you were there. What did you see on ground? What was the experience like, at the venue?
Right. So yesterday, of course, logistically, one has to say there's been lots of communication that went out in terms of planning your, if you're moving through that axis. I'm talking the Lekki Ajah axis. That was just clogged. That being said, there was a lot of organization and coordination from the Dangote Group in getting their guests to be there. Lots of shuttles, lots of choppers coming in. So it was one of the most well-attended events from a private sector perspective that I could say from my perspective.
I mean, he had multiple African presidents attending.
There were five presidents. Four presidents with a representation from one president. We also had, of course, President Muhammadu Buhari, who, of course, was doing the commissioning. President-elect Bola Tinubu wasn't there; he's out of the country currently, but it was very well organized. I've got to tell you that there were speeches and of course in-person felicitations, and you could see the air of celebration around it, even if there were also questions, and a few of those questions are you're already asking, how is this going to affect the layman? But there was still a lot of a celebration around the prospects that lie ahead, job creation, the fact that this facility also has the ability to process other African crudes, some Middle Eastern crudes, and the U.S. light oils. That's absolutely, that's a huge feat. So of course, it was a really, really, there was a lot of celebration around that yesterday.
Talk to me about numbers, because some people are claiming, which this is inaccurate. A lot of people are claiming that this is the biggest refinery in the world, but I believe it's the correct words are it's the largest single line or single chain.
Yes. Refinery.
Like, can you correct me? Like, yes. Yeah. Can you because I know the biggest one in the world is in India, which produces about twice the amount of crude oil.
You're absolutely right.
So please go on.
So it is, you're right, there is a miscommunication out there. What it is the largest single train refinery facility in the world. The difference between that and what you have in India is that a lot of the many refineries use a multiple train. A train would refer to the crude distillation unit, where the product itself, the crude comes in, and of course as you have there's different levels of separation where the products are refined, and you start to have gasoline, you start to have diesel, you have the byproducts. For the Dangote Refinery, instead of the multiple CDUs, which is a crude distillation unit, it's just one unit. In many ways, that benefits. So, yes, that's a big difference.
So it's really just the technology that is more advanced than anything.
Absolutely, yeah.
But is there if it's just one sort of, I'm assuming that a train, you call it a train, yes, right? Is referred to as almost like a funnel.
Yes.
Is it like a funnel?
A distillation column.
So if Okay, and so if it breaks, then what happens?
Yeah, so that's a very important question, because a lot of the that is such a good question, because you have the other refineries with the multiple ones. Of course, the importance for them would be, hey, if something happens with this one, we could use that. But this, I have to step back a little bit and address some of the status checks that this refinery had to pass through to even get to this point. And on the Nelson Complexity Index, this refinery is on the level of 9.5, which means that it is expected to be so technologically sophisticated. So without passing that test, that CDU can be there for decades without anything happening. So we're talking the highest level of technological sophistication. It costs a lot more to have a single train than to have multiple trains. Hence, the bigger financial investment. Yes.
So it's a better assertion to say it's the most advanced in the world, most advanced refinery in the world, but not the biggest.
No, it's certainly not the biggest. It is, however, the biggest single train refining facility.
Right. Yeah. So here's the thing, right? So there's this conversation around us having just Dangote. I know there are other refineries in Nigeria, not nearly the same scale, but to say that, you know, we're almost relying on just one man, one entrepreneur, one businessman, right? Other countries, like there are some states in America that have, you know, over 100 refineries, right? And so then should there be a push from government to sort of invest in more refineries?
Yes, there absolutely should be. And it's such an important point, Ken, just because, yes, this is a critical point where you have the Dangote Refinery, a completely privately owned investment. Yes, it's a right push it's a push in the right direction, I beg your pardon. However, we're not anywhere close to where we should be. Yes, we're going to have 650,000 barrels a day in terms of what will be refined products. That being said, this is just one initiative. And it will bring some sort of relief and circuit to the oil and gas sector, to the downstream sector. That being said, imagine if we had more. Imagine how much more savings we'll be making in terms of our revenues, how much more capital we will have to go into these other sectors, not just the critical sectors. Every other sector will benefit from it. And it's imperative that this conversation happen. But then again, we have to be reminded that not just the conversation, the government, quote unquote, has been making these efforts to rehabilitate these smaller refineries. In fact, as we speak, the NNPC has just invested about $3 billion into the state-owned refineries. But again, back to accountability. Who is holding accountability in terms of maintenance, in terms of delivery, in terms of the final, you know, so otherwise we're going to be going back because this conversation has been there for decades.
So a lot of people will say, because, you know, Buhari, I know he came for the commissioning of this refinery. Dangote thanked him, so he's done a lot to support in this. He also commissioned the opening of a world-class hospital in Abuja. Some people are saying this is the last week of his of his tenure. And some people are saying, why is he waiting to the last week for him to to commission these things that we've needed
all the while,
for the past, right, all the while. So please let me know what you're hearing on ground about this sort of conversation.
Yes, quite legitimate. I've got to say that for the Buhari administration, the Dangote Group actually owe a lot of thanks to him accordingly, because let's remember that it was under this administration that you have the passing of the PIA, that has been there for quite a while in terms of just easing the oil and gas sector. It was a conversation that's been existing through previous administrations, but this one did it. You're very right about the convenience, like how convenient it is. You're leaving in a few days or in a few weeks, then all this commissions are happening. But you must also remember that the administration coming in is also of the same party. So it's a question of, are we just passing on the baton to the new
Well, I think what it's very clear that the two people are different, yes. Tinubu and Buhari. And for me, I imagine Buhari wants to take ownership of this, and he doesn't want Tinubu to take ownership of this, right? He wants it to be part of his legacy,
absolutely.
Right? But I wonder, it's just interesting to me that, why did it take so long to build the refinery? I imagine there were so many challenges, because had been promised every year that it was going to be open this year. And now it's like, but conveniently, just at the end of literally the last few days before he leaves office, is when he's commissioning this. what challenges do you think that they could have faced based on if you know anything,
Right.
any inside
The
information?
challenges that I'm aware of are more outside of the administration. They are more within the Dangote Group itself for what the delay was. And it's a good thing we're actually talking about this as well, because we must remember one of the points that he really highlighted. I'm talking about the president of the Dangote Group, Aliko Dangote, is that in 2007 was the first attempt that he made to do this. But the then administration almost promised him, just tossed him back and forth and said, yeah, we'll do it. And then at the very last minute, they're like, we're actually not going to do it. Hence his thankfulness to this administration for even giving him a chance to say, we, the private sector, are going to take this off your hands. If you just give us a chance to do it, let's even try it. So in many ways, maybe kudos to Buhari's administration for even allowing that happen, because the other administration, we have been in the dark for over 16 years because some other administration refused to accept him to do this. But the major challenges were around the COVID period of time, and that really posed a huge challenge to the entire plans that the refinery had in terms of moving a lot of the equipment, a lot of the critical infrastructure that they needed. And that really paused and not only interrupted the flow, it also increased their capex, the amount of money they had to spend, because now the exchange rate, all of that was on pause. Then, of course, when things began to accelerate, you also had the Russia-Ukraine situation, which in many ways also had interrupted the entire flow. So those were the delays. But at the same time, there were also investments. We have companies and individuals who have invested in this project, which the CBN governor actually mentioned yesterday that out of the entire debt, 70% of the debt has already been paid as we speak. So,
Oh,
yeah,
really?
so
Of the debt
of the debt,
to build this refinery?
absolutely. And it's not even gone into production yet. So that's good news in many ways, and hoping
Wow.
that it just continues to accelerate from there.
I mean, I don't think there's any question about the funding or the ROI on this. This thing is needed in the country, and it's going to make a lot of money down the line. The real question is what I really want to unpack or understand. And I don't know if you have any insights into this, but what are these agents that are working against? Look, at the end of the day, when we're importing oil, there are people that are benefiting from
Yeah.
that. When we're paying for diesel, when we don't have we haven't electrified the country, there are people that benefit from that.
Sure.
So I guess my question is,
What could go
all of
wrong?
these agents that might have worked against him, because they're going to lose their bottom line now that he's building this refinery. And it's unfortunately in the oil and gas industry, there's a lot of that, a lot of sort of the sleazy, business that goes down that only, a few benefit, but the rest of the country suffers,
Yeah.
Can you speak to that on any sort of insights you have?
So one thing that is for sure, that is certain, is that the middleman is going to be eliminated throughout this process. Now, what other ramifications will come out of that? We have to wait and see. But we can already imagine one of the major deterrents to growth of the oil and gas sector in Nigeria has been oil theft and pipeline vandalism. And this has existed over years, and which also goes back, I am sorry to be repetitive, back to this topic of accountability. If you have a problem that is existing for so many years, surely somebody's benefiting from it for that problem to still exist. So one of the, dare say, good things that could come out of this is that eliminate the middleman, and perhaps we're going to see less of that. But at the same time, eliminating the middleman could also lead to a situation where what does the middleman do now? What's his job? Where is his revenue coming from? And what could that possibly lead to? Are we going to see worse cases of oil theft? Are we going to see other areas in which crime is going to be developed? All of those kinds of situations. But in terms of the impediments to the growth, which I believe is what you're trying to get out of this question, is oil theft has been very rife in Nigeria, and almost quite sophisticated now. It's not just the little situations where we had of a pipe burst here and there, deliberate pipe bursts. Now it's a more sophisticated operation. I know that the NNPC has done quite a lot of work in bringing in some technology to work around this, but that being said, it's going to take a lot more than that. But with the production, once this refinery comes into production, we're going to definitely see a huge gap in the middle stream.
Yeah. And so now on the topic of oil theft, yes, I know you said it's more sophisticated. I remember there was a pipe. I don't know. You guys covered it at Arise. There was a pipe somewhere that there was a clear theft. That someone created their own sort of
Yes,
their own funnel to take out of it,
it is
and like
mind
there was
blowing.
just in front of a security, just in front. Were you there? Was
No,
it
it
you
wasn't
that
me. It
reported
wasn't me.
that?
It was only
Okay.
Sunday. Yes.
Okay, and just in front of a security post. So clearly that they're in cahoots. So I guess the question then is, how much does the government really know that's going on that they just sort of ignore? Or maybe like the government is such an, such an umbrella term. So perhaps like individual agents that are sort of like seeing this stuff happening, but they're benefiting from keeping their mouths shut. What do you think are some of the solutions that can, I know technology reduces the ability for corruption, but when it comes to physical goods, what are sort of the systems that maybe Dangote is putting in place to tackle this?
Right. I think you're spot on to begin with. Yes, the technology is really been great because it's going to really help. But that being said, the situation itself is also a lot more sophisticated than that. So until we start to see genuine situations of whistleblowing, people calling out, this, you are part of this deal, you are benefiting from this, and that's why this is here. Until we start to see those kinds of situations, I believe that it's going to be a bit hard to tackle the situation of oil theft on that sophisticated level, because like you said, some people are, they can see, but they're like, okay, cool, as long as I can get something out of it, let's just keep it a deal between us. And that's exactly what's going on. Until we have a situation where this is a little more invasive and we start to see people calling out and the real whistleblowing, which of course the NNPC technology is also asking for you to be completely anonymous if you know something about it and you want to come out and say, hey, I know that this governmental structure, this agency is part of it, I know this individual is part of it, and then we give you a compensation for whistleblowing. And of course, that has also been a good incentive for some people to come out and say so. Until we start to see a bit more of that, and punitive measures as well, because it's one thing to whistleblow, and then it's another thing for nothing to happen. So what are the punitive measures attached to being caught or being associated with an entire chain of this nature? Until we see any of that, I promise you it's going to keep going on.
So really, I guess the question then is, what hopes do Nigerians have to really see any, like, what sort of impact does this refinery really have on Nigerians? Is this more of a symbolic small step to the next era, or yeah? Let me know your thoughts on
Yes,
that.
I think for this particular question, it's a dual approach to it, the way that I see it. On the one hand, it's purely economical in terms of the sense of what I mentioned earlier, boosting our foreign exchange reserves, being able to divert funds into critical sectors that need it, and job creation. Job creation is so critical. I must mention that the Dangote Refinery on this project alone has invested educationally in about 900 engineers outside to get some refinery skills. Apart from that, you also have huge capacity development, local content development, capacity building that is going for thousands and thousands. So far through this entire process, 70,000 jobs just not even just from project stage were developed, and we're looking at about 135. So from a purely economic perspective, we're already beginning to see that impetus for change, and hopefully it will continue to graduate and expand.
So you're saying how many jobs has it already created,
70,
or is it
70
estimated to?
70,000 so far just from project
Impressive.
stage. However, it's going that
Fantastic.
is going to rocket to over 138,000 just from the newer chains that are going to be built, more downstream, things like that. So that already is an immediate injection. But that is just the one
So
side. The second side is the psychological side. So just the thought that one individual, and I think that this is so critical, Kenny, one individual thought, I'm going to take on this audacious project. I'm going to make it happen, something that the government hasn't done. In many ways, it speaks to just the gusto and just the power to say, hey, look, other entrepreneurs, other industrialists in Nigeria will hopefully come up and believe in putting their foot forward and saying, look, we can also do something. We can also invest. Right.
right. So let's look at the free trade zone, right? A lot of people have been saying for the past, I don't know, maybe 3-4 years, even before that, to go and invest in that area, right? But some reports have come out about the environmental implications and the pollution due to this refinery. Do you see that there's going to be a lot more sort of housing developed in that area? That's a good place to invest, but also juxtapose that with the environmental concerns. Should people really be investing, in real estate in that region?
Right. So when it comes to the environmental credentials and their sensibilities around it, so I'm going to start that from, I think there's also a huge misconception out there or misunderstanding of what the nature is. I have worked on the Dangote Refinery project for months, so I'm opportune to get some more details and insight as to certain things that need to happen. But that being said, Nigerian crude is one of the finest crudes in terms of the lowest sulfurs there are in crude, which immediately translates to a lot less emissions. Our carbon footprint is so much lower than that of the Western world. The Western world are the ones really dealing with emission issues in the face of global warming and not even taking the appropriate steps. So in fact, many of them actually want to get Nigerian crude to mix with their higher crudes to even bring down the emissions. So immediately, those concerns around emissions and the environmental sensibilities dissipate. They do not exist. In terms of investment in the free trade area, a lot of people have already started already hedging their bets and buying property there because they're thinking 10 years from now. They're thinking even as close as 5 years from now. So those things are already happening. I think just over time, the world is going to start to, Nigeria actually is going to start to understand more what the details are. But of course, the locals around there, the immediate concern is like fumes and, all of these emissions, which is not going to be a concern from what I understand.
Okay, so you think it's not going to be as much as a concern, but I would still say maybe not get property, maybe wait, I don't know, 5 miles away.
Yeah, for you not to be right,
yeah,
right, to be
concerned,
Fair enough.
But I guess people would have to look up those. Because I know there are apps that you can look at the air pollution and all of that stuff. So, I would say maybe someone should go out there, inspect the air pollution.
And of course, also sensitize the public because that's not happening. They need to be more sensitization to say to the locals that, hey, this is what it means and all that. So there are immediate concerns, but I think it's also a lack of the right sensitization around it. And I think that when that happens, people will be less concerned.
But I understand that you're saying that Nigerian crude is cleaner, but it doesn't mean that it is clean, right? Because it's still
cleaner. Absolutely. It's fossil fuels.
Cleaner, but doesn't mean that it's still not going to be polluted,
Absolutely,
so
absolutely.
Living in those regions might not be the safest.
Absolutely.
It might not be the safest
and the consideration of then again, even talking Lagos, which is one of the most highly polluted areas to even start with, just in terms of air. So there are all of those considerations. Absolutely.
Right. Thank you so much. Is there anything else that was important about the refinery that you think that we haven't touched on?
I think those are the key details. Of course, it's been a very important, monumental project for the Dangote Group, for Nigeria, for West Africa. And of course, this is also going to be servicing West Africa and Central Africa. I guess the most important part is that as we currently, the state we currently are in, South Africa, other parts of Africa are shutting down refineries. So this is also quite monumental for Africa in terms of a project that will benefit the continent as widely as possible. So, congratulations.
Why is South Africa shutting down refineries? Because South Africa is going, I don't know how to say this in a nice way. So South Africa is deteriorating. Every time I go back, it's getting worse and worse because of corruption, clearly.
Yeah, corruption, yes.
Talk to me about why South Africa.
Yeah,
there's a real big issue with load shedding, what we call NEPA in Nigeria. So talk to me about that. Why are they shutting down refineries in South Africa?
Yeah, so it's also about cost management. South African refineries came in with a huge capital injection that they were not able to manage over time. And I think that's one of the lessons that the Dangote Refinery probably picked up from them in terms of, hey, are we just going to do a massive investment, pay off our debts, and then we start to just manage as we go. With South Africa, it was a case of we're going to throw everything in, and before you knew it, you were in severe debt, which already started to translate into the power sector, ESCOM. like you just mentioned, load shedding. And some of the most realistic approaches they could have to it is let's shut these refineries down, at least for now, and find a more strategic way to approach it. Hence being
I
here.
understand. And,
Yeah.
and how close do you think Nigeria is? Because the rest of the world is going to renewable energy. I know Biden is investing a lot of money, even in Africa via the World Bank, in Africa to sort of support us with that, fund renewable energy projects. What hope do you think? How much are Nigerians paying attention to that opportunity there?
Yeah. With renewable, the truth is that the renewable energy is the future, not the immediate future for Africa, however, for Nigeria particularly. And one of the biggest concerns is like, look, is this a good time to be building a refinery? Because the future really is renewables. Are we going to be? But technically, if we look at the Industrial Revolution, this is something that is not going to take place for another 40 years. If this conglomerate is wise enough, cash in, do a good job, make sure this is something that, because oil is still the golden goose of this country, whether we like it or not. It's just a major mainstay, and it's not going away anytime soon. That being said, we can't forget that when we're talking 50 years from now, oil is going to become obsolete, but there is still enough time for Dangote to recoup his investment.
Absolutely. Thank you so much,
Thank
Abby.
you, Kenim. It was a pleasure.
All right.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.
Well, that's all for today's episode of Business in Nigeria. We hope you found this informative and helpful. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to reach out to us on our website or on our social media. Don't forget to subscribe. Yes, subscribe to our podcast, subscribe to our YouTube channel, subscribe to our Instagram, Twitter, all of those. Subscribe. The more subscriptions we get, the more incentive we have to make more episodes, and the more guests we'll be able to bring on to educate you about navigating the business landscape in Nigeria. So subscribe for more valuable insights and tips on starting and growing your business in Nigeria. Until next time, stay motivated, stay informed, and keep pursuing your entrepreneurial dreams in Nigeria.